plays out.
That's not what's happening. They're failing. The system is working. They have fitness standards. They have standards for civics. If you fail the standards, you don't get in.
Hey, welcome back to the channel. Seriously, I'm glad you made it for this one. What you're about to watch is a panel debate that didn't just get intense. It completely spiraled over ICE enforcement training standards and the bigger question of whether the rights of American citizens are being crossed out in public spaces. Now, Anna Navarro and the liberal panel come in fully prepared. We're talking documented cases, verified reports, and actual data on the table. While the conservative side tries to defend the system but slowly backs itself into a corner it can't really get out of. And there's a moment, just one, where a confident claim gets challenged with real numbers, and suddenly the person has no choice but to admit what they were trying to push back against. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around until the very end for that part, because it hits in a way you don't really expect. But before we jump in, go ahead and drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I always like seeing just how far this channel is reaching around the world.
When you look at some of these interactions between ICE agents and the public, frankly, it's not entirely surprising that that's what's happening as they try to rush these people through the process of getting certified to be on the streets.
Okay, well, in all honesty, I'm athletically allergic. Could not pass the presidential exam when I was in school, could not do a pull-up for a nanosecond. That being said, look, I think this lack of not only the athletic aspect, but also the civics aspect is showing in the interactions we are seeing. There have been at least 170 U.S. citizens that have been detained by ICE. We have seen people get scooped up because they're black in Chicago, U.S. citizen blacks, put into U-Haul trucks, in the back of U-Haul trucks. We have seen teenagers pinned to the ground. We know that there have been more deaths in ICE custody in the last few months than there were in the last 4 years. So, I would hope that even folks who are in favor of deporting everybody, I would hope that there would be some agreement that there needs to be rights, that there needs to be a process, that people need to be allowed to show ID, that they can't just be scooped up in that way and have their rights violated. It's just inhumane what we are seeing in the streets of America.
Or at least that the standards shouldn't be lowered just to meet a quota.
Okay, I just have to respond to this. If you are housing or living with somebody in MS-13 or a gang member, it is very possible that you could get swept up in that. That is just a reality.
Listen, the vast majority of the people who have been detained do not have criminal records. 75%.
If you're living with a gang member, you gotta know that's a possibility.
That's not the people that were scooped up in this residential building in the middle of the night. You're just making things up. You're making things up. Most of the people that have been detained do not have any criminal records or ties to gangs.
I'm sure you can find an example or two of this, but we also know the situations for a lot of these 170 Americans. And some of them were just happened to be in the same location as other people who might have been targeted by ICE and were still scooped up.
The teenage black boy I was referring to was in a CVS.
To Anna Navarro's point, that apartment building that they raided a couple of weeks ago that housed, frankly, mostly Americans, they only identified 2 alleged Tren de Aragua members. The rest of the people who were arrested, including American citizens, they're not gang members. So that's also happening.
Okay.
But I was asking you about the standards, because the issue at hand here is that the standards are not being met, and B, in some cases, are being slightly lowered to allow more people to get through this process because they have to meet a quota. And when you're talking about law enforcement, is that really what we should be doing?
This is the kind of moment where you pause and realize something is seriously off. Because when Anna Navarro pointed out that at least 170 U.S. citizens have been detained by ICE, that number should have brought the entire room to a standstill. Not 170 suspected offenders. Not 170 people with questionable histories. 170 individuals who had every legal right to be exactly where they were. And then she pushes it further. She described people being rounded up in Chicago simply for being black, loaded into U-Haul trucks. Think about what that actually looks like. Not a squad car, not a marked federal vehicle, a U-Haul, like belongings being hauled out of someone's home. That image alone says everything about the level of respect, or lack of it, being shown in those situations, and honestly, it's none. Now here's the part that's hard to wrap your head around. The response from the other side didn't address any of that directly. Instead, it immediately shifted to, well, if you're living with a gang member, you could get caught up. That was the explanation. For 170 citizens. For people being put into U-Haul trucks. For teenagers being forced onto the ground. The takeaway was basically, you should have picked better neighbors. And then the liberal panelist brings in a number that should have shut the entire argument down on the spot. 75%. 3 out of every 4 people detained had no criminal history, no gang affiliation, no charges, nothing. So that whole gang member roommate argument doesn't just weaken. It completely collapses under the weight of actual data. What makes this even tougher to watch is how the apartment raid was handled. When it came out that a building filled mostly with American residents was raided, and only 2 suspected members of a foreign gang were identified, the conservative side responded by saying, "You're just making things up." But it wasn't made up. It was documented. And that right there tells you everything about how one side chose to engage in this debate. Because when enforcement standards start getting lowered just to hit quotas, and the people being sent into communities aren't fully trained on citizens' rights, that's not proper enforcement anymore. That turns into something else entirely.
No, absolutely not. And unfortunately, this is not really an ICE problem. This is a problem across the board. I think as many as 80% of police officers are overweight, and so we've seen standards just decrease across the board. Now, my understanding is that they aren't decreasing the standards. They're just saying that a lot of people are failing, and I think that's okay, right? They have a lot of people who are interested in joining. Not all of them are going to meet the criteria, and that's the reality.
A lot of people are joining because a lot of people need jobs. A lot of people are failing because we don't teach civic in schools, and that's a problem. And
They're offering $50,000 bonuses.
a lot of people are taking the job because there's student loan forgiveness. And I hope they don't lower the standard, because the last I checked, it was the DEI candidates that needed the standard lowered. But now it seems like the people who want to work for ICE might get their standards. Let's just see how this all plays out.
That's not what's happening. They're failing. The system is working. They have fitness standards. They have standards for civics. If you fail the standards, you don't get in. So the story is that you have a system in place designed to weed people out who shouldn't be in, and it's working. That's a good thing.
I will say this. So here's what we know, at least for now. In February, the requirements were this: 32 sit-ups in a minute or less, 22 push-ups in a minute or less, 220-yard sprint, 1.5 mile run. Now, the standard is 15 push-ups as opposed to 22. So it's still 32 sit-ups, 1.5 miles, in slightly less time than before. So there's been a slight adjustment. Who knows why? You need to do 7 fewer push-ups than before, but
the standards were lowered.
You still have to meet an athletic standard, and you still have to meet a civic
So they lowered the
standard.
standard.
But standard's still declining.
I also think, I mean, to me, also the civics part is huge, because knowing people's rights in this country is part of what you need to know if you're going to be violating them potentially as a law enforcement officer, or at least you have the power to do that.
But there was another claim tucked into that report, which is the people themselves are misrepresenting themselves. Say they're lying. See, that's a decline of standards too. It's a matter of character. It's a matter of soul craft. So it's not just you got a decline of standards across the board, and too often you want to scapegoat the most vulnerable. It must be the black folk and brown folk responsible for the decline of standards. No, get off the crack pipe. That's not true at all. What's really true is the decline of standards across the board, and people acting as if they're so athletically on the cutting edge, and when it's time to take the test, they can't pass it.
And if you lie on your application, perhaps you lie on the job.
This is the part one keep coming back to, because what played out here wasn't just another exchange in a debate. It was someone running straight into a contradiction they set up themselves. The conservative panelists spent the entire first half arguing that the people being detained somehow had it coming, that the system was operating the way it should, that the standards were intact. And then, once the actual numbers came into the conversation, he pivoted hard and brought up DEI. He said, and I need you to hear this clearly. The last I checked, it was the DEI candidates that needed the standard lowered. Now understand what just happened there. That wasn't a direct response. That was a deflection, shifting the focus onto a completely unrelated group to avoid answering the actual question. Nobody brought up DEI. The discussion was about ICE requirements. That point got introduced because there wasn't a solid answer ready. And then the data shows up, right there on screen. February requirements, 22 push-ups. Updated standard, 15 push-ups. And this is the moment that makes the entire segment stand out. The same person who just pointed at DEI is then put in a position where he has to say it himself. So the standards were lowered. He said it out loud. The same individual who tried to attribute lowered standards elsewhere had to acknowledge that the standards tied to the system he was defending had, in fact, been reduced. That's not a minor slip. That's a full contradiction playing out in real time. And there's a deeper layer to that. There's a long-standing pattern where some groups are told they have to clear a higher bar to prove themselves, while in other cases, that bar quietly shifts when it becomes inconvenient. Watching that double standard get exposed and then confirmed by the very person who leaned into it, that's one of those moments that sticks with you. Then the conversation shifts again, and the point about dishonesty hits differently. The liberal panelist made a statement that sounds straightforward but carries real weight. If someone is willing to lie on an application, what happens when they're on the job? Because law enforcement runs on trust. The second that trust is compromised at the entry level, it doesn't just mean one bad hire. It means someone with authority backed by the system who already has a pattern of bending the truth. And when that happens, there's a cost. And it's the community that ends up paying for it.
Today, there was an ICE police officer whose weapon discharged and injured a U.S. Marshal and the suspect because they were using the service weapon to bang on the window of a suspect. I mean, I don't know. I mean, these are the types of things that just seem like, is there proper training happening here when it comes to ICE?
There's not. We've all seen it. And there should be.
You definitively state that they're not being properly trained. Do you know that?
They're shooting dogs. They're shooting dogs in people's that have been locked in people's bathrooms. They're abandoning small children alone in cars while they. No, it's not false. Look it up. Don't just say false. I actually
abandoning small children. They turned the children over to HHS.
There were actually
custody.
Small children abandoned in a highway in a car in Cicero, Illinois.
You make these sweeping statements that they're not training.
Would you like me
they're
to
not
get
training ICE.
with
of course they go through
examples
training.
of what is happening?
Of course they're training them.
Well, they're training them, then they're not learning the stuff. They're definitely violating human rights, Scott.
Well, I disagree with you.
Okay, well.
Well, look, Scott, she had a specific example. Sounds like you were unfamiliar with it.
I'm not aware of her example. Here's what I know.
Okay, so
under
you don't
Joe
know
Biden, under Joe Biden, they didn't enforce federal immigration law. Now we do. We're having hundreds of thousands of interactions.
My point is that you
things
just
will
said,
happen, but she said they are not
I know,
training
but you,
them.
but
She
no,
said
but
they're not
she-
training.
she-
Do you
no,
think
no,
that?
no,
Do you
she
think
said-
that trained? Do you think that trained
She was saying a
ICE
specific
agents
example,
would,
and you said it was
scoop up
false.
U.S. citizens?
Don't.
She said,
you just
quote, they're not
acknowledged
training
that.
them.
You just
We all
acknowledged that
see
you
it.
don't know what she was
Do you
referring
think?
to.
I don't. I
Do
don't
you
know
think
what
that
she's talking
scooping
about.
up U.S. citizens without giving them?
I disagree with the generalization that they're scooping up U.S.
There's
citizens.
170 that have been.
Well, there's
scooped
over
up.
500,000 illegal aliens that have been
There's
deported.
little children that have been
1.6
scooped up
million have
that are U.S.
self-deported.
citizens.
All right, look.
I know you don't want the law enforced. I get it.
You
You don't have to yell at me. You don't want the law
All right,
enforced.
you're the
I
one yelling
understand.
too.
Listen, look. It is true.
Guess what?
That
On
United
this
States
table, black and
citizens
white people can
have
yell.
been detained by ICE without.
Detained and released.
Yeah,
Released.
But
Released.
whether you're detained
After
and released
hours or
after
days of
hours or
being
days,
held?
your rights may still be violated, and that's still an issue that people have a
Can I
right to
just-
be concerned
Can I
about.
just throw a curveball? The reason why they're often detained though is also because of the color of their skin.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's, again, a sweeping blanket general. Do you know of a
No, we got
specific
data for that.
instance
No,
where
no, we
someone,
got
I mean,
data for that.
honestly,
I
They got data.
actually,
Question, do
the
we know
answer
of a
is
specific
They got
instance
data
of
for
what?
that.
the answer
I mean,
is.
you're saying they're
hold
not
on a
training.
second.
You're saying they're racist.
The
I mean, these are
answer-
I
blanket
didn't say that.
statements.
That was a blanket
That's
statement.
The
wild.
answer is yes, we do know of
That was a
specific
blanket
instances
statement.
in which people, American citizens,
Yep.
have been arrested because they happen to be in a particular place and look a certain way. That has actually happened. They're documented. So this is
And
not
released.
guesswork that we're doing here. Yeah, but they're still detained. They're still arrested without their rights being given to them. That is still happening.
Let me break down what this final section really brought to light, because it wasn't just pointing to a policy issue. It exposed a credibility gap, and it was clearly coming from one side of the panel. When the report surfaced about an ICE officer whose weapon discharged while using it to tap on a car window, the question from the liberal side was actually straightforward. Is proper training even happening in these situations? And Scott pushed back immediately. He challenged it head on. He asked for proof. He pressed the panel, basically saying, "Can you actually confirm that agents are not being trained the way they should be?" So she answered. She didn't stay vague. She gave specific examples. The liberal panelists talked about incidents where dogs were shot while confined inside homes, brought up cases involving children being left inside vehicles. She was clear. She was detailed. And Scott's response? He said it was false. Now here's where everything starts to unravel for him. Just moments after dismissing those claims, he follows it up with, I don't know what she's talking about. Think about that. He labeled the examples as false without even knowing what the examples actually were. That's not strategy. That's speaking without having the information and hoping confidence fills in the gaps. And this goes beyond just winning or losing an argument. When someone publicly dismisses documented incidents without understanding them, it reflects a kind of disregard that allows real issues to keep getting brushed aside. Then the conversation circles back for one final exchange, and it ties everything together. The idea that being detained and later released somehow makes it okay sounds like a defense until you really hear the response. Whether someone is held for a few hours or several days, a violation of rights is still a violation. That point isn't opinion. It's grounded in law and backed by history. The Fourth Amendment doesn't come with a condition that depends on how long someone was held. Either those rights are respected or they aren't. In the cases being discussed, American citizens detained based on where they were or how they looked, those aren't just claims. They're documented. They're on record. Repeating a blanket denial over and over doesn't erase that. People are still being detained. They are still being arrested without their rights being fully respected. And as the panel has pointed out, this is still happening. So what do you think about all of this? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.